When I'm working with people, talking to clients, whatever it is, one of the big questions that I get are, what are compulsions? I don't know what my compulsions are. How do I figure out my compulsions? That's really a big sense of confusion for people. So this episode today, what I wanted to kind of talk about is to go into what a compulsion is, how can you figure out what your compulsions are, and then give a few examples just to kind of help us or help you start with your compulsion journey, right? Because as you know, if you're listening to this, when you have OCD, one of the biggest things that you have to do is limit and end up stopping compulsions, because compulsions are the things that reinforce your anxiety and your intrusive thoughts when you have OCD, right? So a quick recap, you get an obsessional thought into your head, whatever that is, because of some kind of trigger, or sometimes the thought just happens. Then you start feeling this fear or anxiety, and then you do something to make that thought go away, or that feeling to go away. And that thing that you do is going to be the compulsion, right? So first off, when you're trying to figure out what your compulsions are, there's a couple different ways that we can do it. But first, it's good to kind of just quickly explain. A compulsion is anything that you're doing physically or mentally to make your anxiety and your obsessional thought go away. So if you feel the urge that you have to do something about your obsessional thought, usually that thing that you're doing, again, physically or mentally, is going to be the compulsion. And anything can really turn into a compulsion, but it just has to do with the urge in the moment to do it. Okay, so let's use an example, and then let's say how we start to figure it out. So first off, just how we figure it out is, if you feel that urge, it's probably a compulsion. But let's put that into an example. So let's just say that you have harm OCD and you keep getting these thoughts in your head about hurting yourself or hurting other people. And then that causes anxiety. Well, what's that next thing that you're going to do, either internally or externally, right? That next thing, that response is probably going to be that compulsion. So how do we figure out what our compulsions are? Well, most OCD books, most therapists, most people that know what they're talking about when it comes to OCD, in the very beginning of your journey, you do basically a thought journal, and you're gathering data to help yourself and help you and your therapist figure out what is the response that you're taking, which are the compulsions that you are doing, right? So when you have that thought about hurting somebody and then you feel that anxiety, you'd simply have a journal that you would have, and you don't need to do this for too long. You're just trying to help yourself understand your response, and you write down the thought, maybe the trigger first, and then the thought or the obsession. And then what do you do right after that to make that anxiety go away? That doing, that response, that thing that you feel the urge that you need to do to make it go away, that's going to be that compulsion, right? And then as you do that, and I would recommend, and I know that most therapists and most books recommend, you do that 2 or 3, maybe up to 5 times a day, so that way you gather some data when it comes to your OCD, right? So you do that for maybe a week or 2, depending on the book. Some books say 1, some books say 2, some might say 3. But really what you're doing is you're formulating and you're gathering data to understand what your response is when you have an obsessional thought and you have anxiety. What that does then is it helps you, like when people ask me, Jonathan, I'm so confused, I don't understand my compulsions. I know I have to stop compulsions, but I don't know what my compulsions are. Cool. Do that journal so that way you understand what you're dealing with and really how you are responding. So for example, with me, one of the things or one of the themes that gets me is scrupulosity, right? So I start feeling and thinking and hoping I'm not going to go to hell, or did I make God mad? Did I sin? And one of the things that I would find is that I was constantly thinking about the story of David in the Bible. Now, if you're not familiar with the Bible, or if you're not familiar with David, David is someone that they say is a man after God's own heart. He's a man that God held dearly, but yet he did some pretty bad things. He sent a person named Bathsheba. He really liked Bathsheba, and he sent her husband to the front line of a war so that way he would get killed so he could take Bathsheba for his wife. So for me, I would find myself replaying over and over and over in my head the story of David, because I was reassuring myself, you know what, Jonathan? Listen, if David was a man after God's own heart, and God loved David, and David sent Bathsheba's husband to the front line on purpose to have him killed so that way he could marry Bathsheba, you're not that bad of a person. Now, that's a good story to know as a Christian, as a reminder that everybody's a sinner and God forgives sins. But if you're reminding yourself over and over and over multiple times, you're doing that in the wrong context, right? Which is, as you got it, or as you can figure out, that's a compulsion. So I found in writing data and understanding how my brain would work is that whenever I would catch myself, oh man, Jonathan, you're thinking about David again. Probably a compulsion. Let's refocus on the present moment. Because compulsions are all about the intent for things that you're doing, right? So reading about David in the Bible, talking about David, that's not a bad thing as a Christian to do. But if you're doing it in the context of OCD over and over and over and over, that's not necessary. Anything can become a compulsion, and you just have to understand and recognize how that's playing out in your life. So for some people, or for most people, it's a good thing to work out, to run, to go lift weights, or do something to get your heart pumping. But if you have health OCD and you're constantly obsessing about your blood pressure, or do you have a stroke, or whatever your health is, and then all of a sudden right away, oh my gosh, I have to go work out, I have to go run right now, that's probably going to be a compulsion. But if you have a scheduled time that you work out every day or every other day, and if you're in a spiked moment, go work out at your scheduled workout time, because that's what you have, and that's good for you. But again, if you're sitting at home and you're like, I have to work out right now, or if I don't do it, I might get sick, then that working out can go from something that is healthy to something that is unhealthy. So hopefully that makes sense. It's all about the intent or the function of the thing that you're doing. Just like praying, right? Most religions have some form of prayer, or even if you're not religious and you meditate, that's a good thing. However, if you find yourself getting triggered and then you think, oh my gosh, I have to meditate right at this moment, compulsion, right? Or if you find yourself as any form of religion or spirituality and you're like, I'm getting triggered, I have to go right now and I have to do this prayer or say this thing because if I don't, something bad's going to happen, compulsion, right? Intent and function of what you're doing is how we figure out and how we understand how the specific thing that you're doing is manifesting itself with you, right? So if you're going to try to figure out your compulsions, let's just summarize really quickly. First off, understanding that a compulsion is something that you feel like you have to do to make your anxiety go away. To really get some good data on yourself, the best thing to do is to do a journal, right? Write down what triggers you, your obsessional thought, and your response. That response is most likely going to be your compulsion. And it's all about the intent or the function of why and what you are doing. So hopefully that helps. Please reach out if you have any questions. And as always, everybody, stay strong.